Hi, this week we're going to talk about digital storytelling, and we're going to focus on using stories and media to construct meaning, and this will show you yet another way to look at digital literacy when in regards to film. So what makes a story? Well, what doesn't make a story, for instance, is taking a group of random pictures like we did with our collage of maybe what we did during the day. Well, that would not make a story in the digital storytelling definition, because in a digital story, we need a call to adventure. We need to see either a conflict or some sort of problem resolution, a transformation or evolution of a character, a transferable transformation. In other words, the reader can learn along with the character. In other words, the words that and the moral of the story. And then we need some sort of an end or a bit of closure. The ability to tell stories and share information through multimedia is digital storytelling, and I'm going to show you a digital story one of my students did.
I'm writing this in behalf of my entire family, but specifically in memory of my dad, W.E. Bud Walford Emanuel Nelson, who fell in love with and gave so much of himself to the town of Sequim. He was not an easy dad to know, probably because, as so many dads of his generation, he had to work too hard just to keep the family afloat. He was not the type of person who shared his inner self, but his love was there with us. In the fall of 1938, a drug wholesaler found themselves with a drugstore on their hands in Sequim. Dad was considered as a good prospect to own and operate that business. At the time, our family was struggling, along with the rest of the country, to get out of the Depression. In 1941, my family bought a home for the first time in Sequim. The front door was directly across from the main entry to the Sequim High School. You could wake up at first bell and be in your seat by second.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced. The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu.
I remember the evening of December 7th, 1941, standing in front of our drugstore on Main Street when about 7 p.m. the Army trucks from Fort Lewis rolled through town. During the night, they occupied the school gym with the locker rooms as an aid station. The basketball floor was covered with cots for housing the soldiers. The soldiers soon became frequent customers at the Nelson Drugstore soda fountain, and Dad invited some of the lonesome ones over for Sunday morning waffle breakfast. That perpetuated a waffle tradition in the Nelson family. Anyway, the numbers of soldiers grew from 6 on that first Sunday after Pearl Harbor to as many as 56 each Sunday over the next 18 months. Added to Sunday breakfast came Sunday dinner, especially for the bridge and pinochle-playing soldier boys. These gatherings soon required Friday and Saturday night dances with the living room rugs rolled up along the wall. These were very well chaperoned by my mother and other community mothers. Don't sit under the apple tree till Johnny comes marching home, and A-Train spawned many romances. More than one of these soldier meets girl ended in post-war marriages. In 1949, just after I graduated from Sequim High School, Dad bought the place on Maple Street, which Dad called Done Moving. It wasn't that Dad was a keen investor in real estate, it was just that it seemed it was a case of using the equity in the house to keep the not very profitable drugstore afloat. But that place on Maple Street was indeed done moving, because we lived there until Dad passed away in 1952. I only saw my father with tears twice. Once in July of 1951, when Mother was in the hospital with cancer, which she recovered miraculously from, and the other time was when he said goodbye to me in Sequim as I got on the Greyhound bus to return to the Naval Academy after Christmas leave. This was just 6 months before he died. It was as if he knew he would not see me again in this life. That was the last time I ever saw him. I have been inspired by an awareness that I miss those years very, very much. Was it because they were my most formative years, or because those were the last 14 years of the not quite 21 years that I had to know my father? I guess that is why Sequim has been so close in my heart all these years. You see, Dad and I never left the place I love, the little town of Sequim.
In this particular lecture, I'm going to use a lot of This one was not one of my students as I watched through it. The rest will be student examples. This came from the Center for Digital Storytelling located in Berkeley, California, and it's one of my favorites. That digital story was made, if you noticed, entirely of still images. So doing a digital story doesn't necessarily mean your students have to go out and shoot video clips. And sometimes that takes a little bit of the nervousness out of using digital story in the classroom. I know it did for me as a new teacher working with, these were adults, young adults at that, but they were adults, and the projects that you're going to see that they created were incredible. And what we really used a lot of was primary sources, old pictures that they got from family members, and a little bit of history. And so that's what I'm going to be showing you. And the reason these are not going to be also posted on YouTube or with YouTube links is I have the permission to share these as part of a presentation to future students, but I did not get the permission to just post them randomly on YouTube. And so that's why you're going to see them as a part of this lecture.
Hey, Tony, get these barrels over to Cicero. Ricky is waiting there with his payment. Oh, and if you see his cousin Bobby, take him for a ride, will you? Sure, boss. What about the cops? Cops? Don't worry about them. They're all with their families enjoying their bonuses. That's a conversation that Al had with one of his gunmen. You see, it wasn't easy being Al's defense attorney. Al truly was the most notorious gangster in the 20s, but he was smart, you see. Al Capone was once an honest, hard-working shoeshiner, turned ruthless gangster after being taken on by Johnny Torrio. Johnny had a bootlegging operation and wanted Capone to command his army of shock troops. Capone revealed a lot about himself to me that until now I never told anyone. Capone was in the business of selling illegal booze to speakeasies throughout Chicago and its suburbs. Not only was Capone a good salesman, but he used tactics not seen in today's sale. You see, if a previous customer decided to buy someone else's booze, Capone would politely suggest that it may not be the best business decision. If the proprietor still refused to purchase, Capone and his goons would ransack the establishment, rendering it no longer profitable. Capone also had other ways to deal with his competitors. As for cousin Bobby, he was taken for a ride, after dealing with the O'Banion gang for the purchase of booze in Ricky's speakeasy. Being taken for a ride was not meant to be fun. It meant that Capone's men would lure a man into their car, drive off, shoot him at their leisure, and then dump the body somewhere outside of town. There was no bargaining with the men in the car. You see, it was a business, a lucrative business. There were enough funds left over to pay off the cops, convincing them to look the other way during bootlegging operations. While Capone could afford to pay off most of Chicago's police force, someone refused payment, dedicating their careers to putting this gangster behind bars. Capone was aware of these few, and made sure his transactions could not be traced back to him. His reign would last until 1931, when he was indicted for tax evasion. After being found guilty, he was sent to federal prison in Atlanta, and it wasn't long before they transferred him to Alcatraz, where he had no contact, therefore could no longer control his crime syndicate. Al Capone's conquest had finally ended, but the effects over my life will last forever.
Now, one thing you'll notice is 4 references. The students were required to write a reflection on doing this project, and in there they would tell where they got every single image. The majority of the time spent on this particular assignment was spent in the pre-production stages. In other words, the scripting, the image selection, and the writing of the story. These were not stories that they went and found online or that they knew by heart. What they did was they would research. First off, each lab, I taught several different lab sections. Each lab section was given a decade. And to narrow it down, then those of us that were teaching it kind of went through and picked different events that happened during that decade, and students drew a straw or a tongue depressor with numbers on it, and they were given a certain event to go in and research. Now, they could definitely trade with somebody else if somebody else had one that really interested them, and a lot of them did. In fact, Brett did that in this one. But then they had to research the history of the time and come up with a story. And I met with them several times in the pre-production to make sure that they had a narrow enough story it's kind of an episodic digital story. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Dr. Jason Oler. And he says, "I like to think of the tools of the digital age as being assistive technologies for the aesthetically challenged." In other words, the student that created this particular film might not have been a really talented filmmaker, but it comes out looking as a pretty professional job with some of the extra video effects. He used iMovie for this particular one and brought all the images in and made sure they were black and white. Bad stories are just made louder by media. They're not enhanced. You have to have a good story to begin with. Why does it need to be told? What does it mean to you? It can either be content-driven, as in the one that you just saw, or it can be creativity-driven lessons, which I'll show you later on. So a little bit about how to craft the story. I use a process that's called story mapping, and this was one that Jason Oler had introduced me to years ago. It starts out with the beginning, and almost every story can be mapped out using this drawing. And then you have a conflict or a problem, it's resolved, and then you have an end. So let's think about the story of Cinderella, and I hope that you guys are familiar with that story. We start out at the beginning. Cinderella, you know, we hear about her trauma of living with her evil stepmother and her wicked stepsisters. And then we see a conflict. She wants to go to the ball. And so during the course of the film, then, you will see that it's resolved and she gets to go to the ball and she meets her prince. And then lives happily ever after is the end. In between, you see a transformation of a character because she goes from feeling she's not worthy to believing in herself and, you know, meeting someone to spend her life with. So which comes first, the story or the images? Well, you know, it kind of depends. Sometimes the images lead to the story. Sometimes it's a story that needs to be told and we go out and we find the images to tell the story. The next one is a case of a story that needed to be told and a young man whose name is Jazz, and he went out and chose the images to tell a story. This is a creativity-driven story about when I grow up.
What I Want to Be When I Grow Up by Jas Upke. Growing up, most people want to be something important. A firefighter, a doctor, a superhero. Someone who is going to make a difference in other people's lives. I was no different. I decided I would be the next Superman. He was important. He changed lives and he saved lives. But I soon realized the hard way. I could not fly. So Superman would not be the job for me. Next, something less spectacular, but still important. A carpenter. I got to build things for other people and help my dad around the house. After getting a nail to the head, I felt it was time to move from work to play. Sports. Making a lot of money and having fun doing it. That would be excellent. I tried golf. I was no Tiger Woods. I tried basketball. I was no Michael Jordan. How about football? Probably not. I'm not quite big enough. Cross country? As you can see, I am not the guy in the lead. Baseball. Now that's my sport. I played and I was good, but I only made it to the collegiate level. Not good enough to make it to the pros. And besides, I was playing a game my whole life going to help that many people. Have you ever heard the expression, music soothes the soul? I'm in a band, and bands can influence the masses with inspiring lyrics and feel-good beats. The only problem with this is getting the masses to listen to you. And to do this, you need a record label. So we'll put the music on hold and try something else. What job is important? What job changes people's lives? What job makes you feel good about yourself? Teacher. That's it. I will be a teacher. Teachers change children's lives. Teachers make the world of difference.
This particular digital story, every time I see it, and I've seen it dozens of times, gives me goosebumps at that moment when he says he's going to be a teacher. And I think that's because that's my chosen career path, and that's something I'm very passionate about. The music in here, you might be saying, well, didn't that break copyright? Well, normally, yes, it would have. And I normally tell students to just put music at the very beginning or the very end. But for this particular digital story, that was his band, and that was his music in the background, so it worked out just fine in terms of copyright. The next example I'm going to show you is one where we retell a traditional story. And so this was, they had to think about what story they wanted to retell and then think about how they were going to show that. And I thought they had a really interesting take on retelling Don Quixote.
Alonso Quijano was a Spanish man who loved to read about adventures of knights and villains. He read so many books that his brain dried up and he went crazy. He donned his armor, mounted his horse, and called himself Don Quixote. Along with his trusty companion Sancho Panza, Don Quixote had many adventures trying to make the world a safer place for his fair lady Dulcinea de Toboso. One of his adventures, he believed windmills were giants. He attacked them and lost. Eventually, his friends captured him and took him home to bed. There he said, "I was mad and now I am sane. I was Don Quixote and now I am Alonso Quijano."
I thought that was very creative. That was a group project, and I think they did that within a week's time. It was a summer school course. The next example I'm going to show you starts off with what's really important about digital stories, and that's there has to be a call to adventure, a reason to want to watch them. And this one is called The Journey to Wizard's Gulch.
The Journey to Wizard's Gulch. High atop a snowy mountain on a peak called Aurora lived a Snow King and a Snow Queen. They were very happily married and lived on the most beautiful peak in all the mountains. The king from the next peak over grew quite jealous of the lives that the Snow King and Snow Queen were living. Each day he would stand upon his peak and look over at them in anger. He decided he must do something to end their happiness. So, the evil king thought to himself, "What if I kidnap the Snow King? I could lock him down in Wizard's Gulch. Nobody ever goes to Wizard's Gulch. Then the Snow Queen will marry me. I'll inherit the most beautiful peak on the mountains, and I'll have the Snow King's happiness." The evil king carried out his plan. He traveled to Aurora's peak, kidnapped the Snow King, and took him all the way to Wizard's Gulch. When the Snow Queen found out what had happened, she was beside herself. "You mean that evil king kidnapped my husband and took him all the way over there?" she asked. "I have no choice but to save my beloved." So the Snow Queen quickly clothed herself with the proper ski gear and headed off to Wizard's Gulch to save her husband. This was no easy task. The Snow Queen skied through fog and snowstorms. She skied down steep, rocky cliffs. She skied through the thick forests of the mountain, dodging trees on her left and her right, until finally she found Wizard's Gulch and rescued her beloved husband. The Snow King and Snow Queen skied back to Aurora's Peak, where they continue to live their very happy lives together.
Now you can see what that particular student did was take her wedding pictures and write a story to fit them. So in that particular instance, the images came first. The next, and I believe the final story that I'm going to share is one that emphasizes the transformation of the main character. And this one I thought was incredibly clever by my good friend, Dennis Culver.
The Adventures of Assimilate and Accommodate, created by Dennis Culver. Meet, assimilate, and accommodate, master manipulators of schema. They exist in the mental realms of one education student, a student you all might know as Dennis. Their mission is a complex and never-ending one. Help Dennis create and modify knowledge. In one of their greatest adventures yet, Assimilate and Accommodate must help Dennis make sense of his first block of methods as well as practicum. Their journey is a long one, full of reading, homework, and projects. If that weren't hard enough, their nemesis procrastination is always trying to trip them up. Will our two heroes succeed? Let's find out. Well, Accommodate, what should we add to Dennis's knowledge first? This Mem Fox book has some good information. Apparently the best way to teach kids how to read is to read to them. That seems important. Hey, have you ever noticed how all the words are backwards in this book? Hey, you have to remember, we're in Dennis's mind. Not everything makes sense. Let's add that info and keep going. How about this timeline of memories? Having Dennis analyze his own experiences in literacy may help him understand how his future students may learn. Good idea. Let's have him use his pen pal letters to gain a better understanding of how students think about literacy and mathematics. We're off to a good start. Wait, do you feel that? Dennis has stopped processing information. His higher level thought processes have ceased. What is happening? There's only one part of Dennis's mind that could make him put off his work. Looks like we need to have a talk with procrastination. Assimilate and accommodate. We meet again. As usual, you are pushing Dennis way too hard. I think he needs to stop thinking for a while. Don't you? No, I don't. Accommodate? Got any ideas on how to stop him? Oh, come on, Accommodate. That would require thinking. Wouldn't you rather just, you know, watch TV or something? Got to think. Got it. Sure, I'll watch TV with you. But first you must explain the benefits of watching TV using 500 words by the time I count to 30. Well, the thing is, I got this other thing back in the cerebellum. I'll foil your plans another time. Maybe. If I feel like it. Work and deadlines. A procrastinator's worst fears. Good work, Accommodate. Let's keep helping Dennis with his schema. This community ethnography assignment is full of info. Not only does it show how literacy and mathematics are linked, it shows how those subjects are used within the family and community. Good point. That will greatly improve how Dennis thinks. His reading and writing lesson plan is useful as well. Through this he can learn how to produce, deliver, and analyze literacy lessons. This collection of work from the class can add to Dennis's thoughts as well. From this he will remember that sometimes the most valuable resource is your peers. He can also learn that everyone's experience with literature is different, and that it will be the same way for his future students. Meanwhile, back in the physical world... Phew, my head hurts. Feels like my schema has been modified or something. It has been a long semester, but I have learned a lot. With another semester down, Assimilate and Accommodate once again succeed in helping Dennis make sense of everything. Until next time. The end.
Now the reason I saved that for last, remember when I said at the very beginning that I did my dissertation work on digital storytelling as a form of reflective practice? Well, this particular digital story was one of my, Dennis was one of my subjects. And that digital story was a reflection on a class that I was observing about early literacy. And so everything he wrote in there that he referred to in his graphic novel style format of his digital story was referring to things he'd done in the class and how he had learned throughout the course of the semester. He used Comic Life to create the graphic book or graphic novel type pictures and then put them into a video format with narrative. So let's look at digital stories and visual literacy. From the very time you start beginning to plan your digital story, from the scripting, the media selection, the music selection, and even the narration choices, whether you're going to use voices or whether you're going to have someone else narrate it or whether it'll be your voice, those are all choices that we make based on our understanding of visual literacy. And then in production, we make filming decisions. We decide if a picture is going to be on the screen for 5 seconds, if it's going to be on there longer, if we're going to have several pictures in rapid sequential. Those are all decisions, along with the after effects, that we make that impact the meaning of the story and how it appeals to learners. And then public viewing. For instance, Dennis made that story knowing that that would be part of his online portfolio. And then we have to address copyright and fair use, and that's another important piece of visual literacy. To be a storyteller means knowing stories in your head. It means knowing how to say them out loud, getting the words right, and making pictures with your words. Stories weave abstract information into authentic tales. Stories have power. Thank you.